The 2018 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Brought to you from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. The Democratic race for the 10th Congressional District.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Bellamy, a multimedia journalist with 11 Alive, and welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta. This is the debate among Democratic candidates for Georgia's Congressional District 10. District 10 includes the eastern part of the state, including Athens, Milledgeville, Monroe, Watkinsville, and Winder. Let's meet the candidates. They are in alphabetical order. Tabitha Johnson-Green, a registered nurse in Washington County, Georgia. Chalis Montgomery is a music teacher and immigration reform advocate in Bethlehem, Georgia. And Richard Dien Winfield is a philosophy professor at the University of Georgia. Now we'll introduce you to our panelists. Meredith Anderson is an investigative reporter at WRDW, and that's in Augusta, Georgia. Blake Aoud is the editor of Flagpole Magazine in Athens, Georgia. And Raul Bali is a news anchor for Oconee Radio Group, which includes stations in Greensboro, Madison, and in Milledgeville. Now let's get started. For rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website. That is atlantapressclub.org. Now, to start the debate, each candidate will be asked one question by one of the panelists. Blake, you get the first question to Richard Dien Winfield.
Sure. Dr. Winfield, your main platform is the federal jobs guarantee, a guarantee of a federal job to anyone who wants one at $20 an hour that would be paid for by a tax on the wealthy. But I'd like a little more specifics about how would we pay for this? What exactly would be the tax rate, who would be taxed, and how much money would this program cost?
Well, actually, this program pays for itself to a large degree. I would estimate that if we pitch it at a very high level of unemployment at 10%, which would involve covering 16 million workers at $20 an hour, the cost for that, including an overhead, would come to nearly $900 billion. But we can subtract from that cost unemployment benefits, which come to $170 billion for that amount of unemployed. We can subtract a large amount of the $70 to $80 billion spent on food stamps, because those who now would have a decent wage would no longer need food assistance. We could subtract many, many other benefits pertaining to housing and other programs, and we could also subtract much of the costs of mass incarceration, which comes to $30,000 per inmate, as well as much of the cost of the opioid epidemic. And we can also subtract the cost of all of the physical and human services that would be provided by putting 16 million people to work, building a new green infrastructure, providing free child care, elder care, mass transportation, and so forth. Right. And it would increase the tax base.
That's our time up for that question. Thank you, sir. Raul, now we'll have you ask a question of Tabitha Johnson-Green.
Ms. Johnson-Green, why do you believe you can beat Congressman Jody Hice or any Republican candidate in a district won by Congressman Hice by 66% in 2014 and by President Donald Trump by 61% of the vote in 2016?
Well, as a registered nurse of 20 years, I've served in several management positions. I pride myself on my ability of working well with others in order to achieve common goals. I will work to be a voice for the voiceless and an advocate for those in need. I am a people person, and I can and will work with across party lines. I believe that we should all work together, no matter what our party affiliation is, for the common good.
All right, thank you. And our final question of this round goes to Meredith Anderson. Your turn to ask a question of Chalis Montgomery.
Ms. Montgomery, rural hospitals are closing left and right, and those that remain are in danger of closing. What would you do to make sure the people of District 10 have a hospital? There's been a lot of talk about health care, but access to it, having a hospital, having somewhere to go, an emergency room, that is also a huge part of the problem in District 10.
Absolutely. Georgia is ranked 43rd in the nation for access to care and 49th in the nation for health outcomes. And what we need to realize that healthcare is not just about our personal health, it's about our personal wealth. When we see hospitals start to close, we lose those jobs. When we see the businesses that serve the hospital close, we again lose more jobs, and then no major employer wants to come into an area that does not have access to health care. Further, we have a serious productivity issue involved when, your workers are sick and dying. So if we want to make sure that we have a better economy in Georgia and better health, we have to prioritize health care first. We have to invest in infrastructure in rural hospitals and make sure that we invest those funds directly, and the time is now.
Thank you. That concludes now the first portion of the debate. The candidates will now ask a question of their opponents. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for a rebuttal. By random selection, Tabitha Johnson-Green, you may ask the first question of one of your opponents.
Okay, I think my question already may have been touched on, but it's for Mr. Richard Winfield. What is the role of the government, and what is the projected cost to the government when guaranteeing jobs for everyone?
Yeah, the role of our government should to provide people with the resources they need to exercise their freedoms. And our government has failed to offer people the opportunity to work in all cases, the opportunity to have a roof over their heads, the opportunity to have access to health care, the opportunity to have access to public education at all levels, the opportunity to have access to culture, and as well as the access to legal care in both criminal and civil representation. So our government needs to step in as an enabler of freedom. And this is something that can be shared in a fair way by putting the burden of taxation on those most able to pay. And we need to do such things as tap the highest incomes and the highest wealth accumulations. Our greatest inequality is in wealth. And we need to think of a wealth tax, particularly on the top 1% who have as much wealth as the bottom 90%. And that way we can have a new birth of freedom.
Ms. Johnson-Green, do you have a response to that?
I do. According to John Wimby of the Journalist Resource, despite increases in minimum wage, inflation has eroded that value. Minimum wage, when it increases, it can have negative consequences. Increases may hurt small businesses. Also, when increases in minimum wages occur, it causes prices to rise in everything from gas prices to grocery prices.
All right, thank you. Mr. Winfield, it is now your turn to ask a question of one of your candidates.
Do I have an opportunity to rebut that or not?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say it's completely false to say that raising wage levels leads to a corresponding increase in prices, because wages are never the entire cost of production. And in manufacturing, they represent only 6% of the cost of production. Even in restaurants, they represent only 20% of the cost of production. So any corresponding rise in prices would be much, much smaller than the rise in incomes.
All right, and now it is your turn to ask a question of one of your opponents.
I'd like to ask my colleague Chalis Montgomery about health care. I think we all recognize that health care is a fundamental right, without which we can't exercise our freedoms. But in turning to the option of a single-payer health care system, Chalis Montgomery has not committed herself to a system with no copays and no deductibles, and she's providing a lifeline to for-profit private health insurers. How is it that you can do this and still maintain health care as a right, not a privilege, for those who have more money and access to these different types of health care provisions?
I've committed myself to a program like Medicare for All that covers every citizen from the top of your head to the tip of your toe with mental, vision, and dental health care. Now, I also want to make sure that this program is sustainable and that we can pay for it for generations. And so I am advocating that if you make more than $250,000 a year, it should be reasonable that you could offer a small copay or deductible in order to maintain that program for the benefit of all. Further, the issue of choice has come up in the district. When I go out and talk to fellow citizens, whether they are Republicans or Democrats, they say, I'm concerned that I won't be able to access the doctor that I wish, that I won't be able to maintain my choice in the system. That's fine. You can go ahead and pick your favorite private plan as a supplement. There should be no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. But our priority is covering everyone, and that is what we will do.
Do you have a response?
Yes. First of all, under a single-payer system with no copays and no deductibles, you have free choice of any provider you want. But if we allow for private, for-profit plans, they will restrict who you can use under that plan, and they will offer services to those who can pay that will not be available to the rest of us. That's unfair.
Chalis Montgomery, it is now your turn to ask a question of one of your fellow opponents.
I would like to rebut as he did before.
Go ahead.
So listen, you know what? It's time for solutions that work. People are dying. We have the 5th highest maternal mortality rate in the nation, and it's time for solutions that work. We cannot be ideologically pure about this. We have to make sure that we find what works in this country, and that is my plan. Now, to Professor Winfield, I would like to ask, how will you represent all of the people of the 10th District and build bridges in Congress if elected?
Now, I will be representing all the people of the district and representing their political visions, because that's what's at stake in representation in a democracy. And by emphasizing the social rights that our Constitution has neglected, which we need to recognize and enforce to be able to take care of our families, as well as participate fairly in our democracy, I will be forwarding programs that Republican legislators will themselves have to recognize are in the minds of their electors. A poll recently taken showed that 71% of Georgians support a federal job guarantee. There is a growing sense that our government needs to provide for all of its citizens and ensure that they have a livelihood and have economic independence and security. And I think the Republican lawmakers in Congress know that they are not invincible due to gerrymandering and the entry of dark money through Citizens United. They are going to have to answer to their electorate, and that's going to provide the bridge between them and the proposals that I'm putting forward.
All right, Ms. Montgomery, do you have a rebuttal?
So what we heard you say was that the electorate will provide the bridge. That is not my definition of leadership. And further, I should say that it is important to note that 96% of the people supporting my campaign come from right here in Georgia. It is time that we sent people to Congress who were of the district, who were representing the majority of the people who live in our district and who understand what it takes to get by every day. And that's me.
All right, thank you so much. That now concludes our second round. For those of you just joining us, this is the debate between the Democratic candidates for Georgia's Congressional District 10. We will now go back to our panel to ask questions to the candidate of his or her choice until we run out of time. As a point of moderator privilege, I may also ask a question of the candidates as well. I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. Blake, you get the first question in this round.
I'd like to direct a question to all three of the candidates, please. At a previous forum, all three of you were asked about Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, and I'd characterize probably all of your answers to a greater or lesser degree as being lukewarm about the idea of a Speaker Pelosi. So I'd like to ask, if Democrats do take the House back in November, and you could pick anyone to be the Speaker of the House, who would you pick?
We'll start this alphabetical again with you, Ms. Johnson-Green.
Miss Nancy Pelosi, we do owe her a great debt of gratitude. She has experience on her side. I would have to do more research to just dig into who would be the best candidate for Speaker of the House at this time.
Ms. Montgomery?
Experience is essential in such a crucial leadership role at this time in our nation. Nancy Pelosi has been one of the most effective speakers of the House, has passed things like the Green Jobs Act of 2007, creating up to 35,000 jobs a year and putting people back to work, creating a green economy. That said, she has been a fairly divisive figure, and I would look for someone who would be able to help us build bridges, would be able to help shepherd the legislation we need through the House. And so I would be open to anyone with experience putting themselves forward as Speaker.
And Mr. Winfield?
I think we have to frankly admit that the Democratic Party is at its lowest ebb in our lifetimes, and that we need to find a new leadership that's going to advance a bold social rights agenda, which is frankly what alone is going to allow us to gain the backing of all those people who have deserted the Democratic Party. And I think we need to find a leader in the House of Representatives who is committed to these programs, which involve a commitment to end joblessness and poverty wages and provide health care for all with no copays and no deductibles.
So do any of you have a specific person in mind that y'all might like to see take on that leadership role?
Well, I myself, I think we want to see who gets elected in this round, because I think the ground is shifting under our feet, and many representatives who have not yet upheld the vision of a federal job guarantee are moving in that direction.
Okay. Ladies? All right. Roll, it is now your turn to ask a question of our candidates.
And my question is for Chalis Montgomery. Ms. Montgomery, one issue that I've covered on a regular basis in the Lake St. Clair, Lake and Coney area is improving rural broadband. What can the federal government do? What can you do in Congress to improve internet access, whether that's faster service, cheaper service, or just more dependable service?
It is time for a massive infrastructure investment in this country. And for many places in America, that has to mean rural broadband. Rural broadband is a lifeline to people who need to age in place, to our disabled community, and folks who just want to be able to have faster access where they live. It's also a predictor of where we will see new investment and new employers coming into an area. So what Congress can and should do, and one of my priorities is to pass a specifically rural infrastructure plan when I am elected.
Okay. Meredith, now to you.
My question is to Ms. Montgomery and Mr. Winfield, because Ms. Johnson-Green already touched on this before in round one, but 10 being historically red, what can you do to overcome the uphill battle that it would be against a Republican in this election?
Thank you. It's essential that the person who takes on Heiss in the fall understands the needs of the whole district. As a teacher and a children's minister, my whole job has been about building bridges, taking care of people, and listening. It's time we had representation that listened to us more. It's time we had someone who stepped in with compassion and common sense and decency. And what it's going to take is someone who can be seen as a bipartisan leader, someone who will go and get the job done, and at the same time not be afraid to stand up for bold progressive principles. And that's me as well. So I believe that it's going to take someone very different. I would be the first woman representing this district, and I think it's time for a change.
Mr. Winfield?
Well, I think the key to winning support in this district and winning back the large majority of voters who have deserted the Democratic Party in this region is to put forward a bold social rights agenda that Democratic candidates have so far failed to offer. And that means dealing with the job problem, which is affecting everyone in the district. We need to recognize having a job as a fundamental right of our freedom. We need to wipe out poverty by having a commitment to a new minimum wage tied to productivity gains. We need, in other words, to provide everyone with the bases of economic independence and security. And I found from my own canvassing efforts among people who are identifying themselves as Republicans that they were, by a vast majority, willing to sign on and vote for me because of these policies that they realize are policies that will transform their lives for the better.
All right, Blake, we're now back to you for another question.
Sure. I'd like to ask Ms. Johnson-Green, because the other two candidates have addressed the issue of health care, but as a nurse, what are the problems that you see in the healthcare system today, and what would your solutions be to fix those problems?
As a nurse of 20 years, I've seen people and spoken with people who have a choice between paying their light bill, buying groceries, or paying for overpriced prescription medications. And that's just a travesty. Everybody deserves access to quality health care. We need to explore other alternatives such as universal health care. Also, we need to look at other forms of service such as telemedication in all of our rural communities. That will help us bridge the gap and with access to health care. So everyone deserves quality health care, and we need to look at other alternatives such as universal health care to make sure that everyone is insured.
Well, we'll go now to you.
Questions for Mr. Winfield. Should people who are living in Georgia but are living in the United States illegally be counted in the 2020 census? And should that question be asked on the census form?
I mean, I think, frankly, the census should take note of who the residents are as well as who the citizens are. I think we do not want to be in the position of other countries, such as in the Gulf, for example, where a majority of their residents have no rights of citizenship. We want to provide our residents, be they here illegally or legally, with a path to legal residence and citizenship. And in that way, we can set the stage for having a body politic in which everyone has representation who is willing to become a citizen, and the door should be open to them.
Meredith?
Ms. Montgomery, I want to ask you about energy. Plant Vogtle is a major employer for District 10. It's also important from the standpoint of the clean energy that it could make. We've watched what happened in South Carolina with VC Sumner being abandoned. There are fears that with Vogtle being so far over budget and so far behind schedule, that a similar situation could occur. What would you do to make sure that Vogtle stays on the course?
Right. Well, you know, Plant Vogtle in and of itself is local to Georgia. But as far as federal energy policy is concerned, I would want to make sure that we could perhaps give extra dollars to shore up those projects. And when we're seeing a project like Plant Vogtle that is so far over budget and behind schedule, I think that there is room for the federal government to take in and make sure that we are doing the job that our citizens expect. And so, you know, in that regard, that is the role of federal government to step in those situations. With regards to other clean energy jobs, you know, this Green Energy Jobs Bill of 2007 needs so much more funding. We can afford to lift people out of poverty and give the job skills needed for the next several decades just by training people to install solar panels and to lay that broadband that we've been talking about, and to make sure that we have the green energy infrastructure that keeps us productive and preserves economic justice for the future.
All right, thank you. That is all the time we have for questions now. Each candidate will have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Richard Dien Winfield, you get the first closing statement.
Okay, thank you. This election is a crucial one because here we have a real referendum on a federal job guarantee, a proposal that promises to wipe out joblessness and poverty wages and set the foundation for all of us to enjoy the social freedoms we need to take care of our families and exercise our fair role in our democracy. The voters of the 10th District have a choice they haven't had before. This is an historical opportunity to transform the political agenda here and in the nation as a whole, and I hope that the voters will join me in making history together. Thank you.
All right, Tabitha Johnson-Green, it is now your turn for a closing statement.
Thank you. In order for our community, our state, our world to move forward, we need an influx of fresh, new, creative ideas. We need to shake up the status quo, no more politics as usual. I'm not a career politician, but I am a concerned citizen who wants to help shape and define the laws that govern our everyday lives. I know the struggles of the everyday citizen. My lifestyle is representative of the people of this district and the state of Georgia. I want to be a voice for the voiceless, an advocate for those in need. So on May 22nd, make sure to vote Tabitha A. Johnson-Green for your U.S. House of Representatives.
And Chalis Montgomery, you may have the final statement in this debate.
Thank you. This is indeed a historic opportunity. For the first time, the citizens of District 10 will have a chance to elect a woman as their representative. I'm proud to be one of more than 300 women across the U.S. running for Congress and one of millions who marched. You know, I'm a progressive who believes that we go forward, not back. I'm a Democrat who understands the power of our social safety net, having survived on free lunch and used Section 8 housing and had Pell Grants for school. I've been a teacher and a children's minister, and so I have served before and I will serve again. I am the wife of a public school educator, and I know how hard it is to get by on one school teacher's income, and that has got to change. I am the mother of a child with a chronic health condition who has had to navigate the system time and time again, and I can say that it is broken, and I am a warrior who will fight for the people of the 10th District like a mother.
All right, thank you so much. That now concludes our debate. We would like to remind voters that the primary election will be held on Tuesday, May 22nd, and early voting has already begun. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. We would also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club and all of the debates they will host this primary election season, visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived there and on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website. That's gpb.org. I'm Jennifer Bellamy, and thank you for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Louder Milk Young Debate Series.